Serenity Valley Stories introduces Beneath the Quiet Veil. I never thought much about the history of my town. It was one of those quiet places where nothing significant ever seemed to happen. Nestled between rolling hills and dense woods, Maple Hollow was a small town that time seemed to have forgotten. The streets were lined with old Victorian houses, their once vibrant colors now faded to dull shades of gray and brown. The town square was dominated by an ancient oak tree, its gnarled branches casting long shadows over the cobblestones. There were no tourists here, no passing strangers, just the same faces day in and day out, people who had lived their whole lives in the hollow. I had moved to Maple Hollow a year ago, seeking solace from the noise and chaos of city life. I was an ordinary guy, nothing special, just someone looking for peace and quiet. My job as a freelance writer allowed me to work from anywhere, so I found a small, affordable house on the outskirts of town, close enough to the woods to feel connected to nature, but not so isolated that I felt cut off from the world. The townspeople were friendly enough, but there was always an undercurrent of something different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was a sense of unease that I felt whenever I ventured into town. The older residents would sometimes talk in hushed tones about the old days, but when I pressed for details, they would change the subject or dismiss it as just stories. I didn't think much of it at the time. Every small town has its secrets, right? It wasn't until one cold, moonless night that I realized how deep those secrets ran. The evening had started out like any other. I had spent the day working on a new article, my laptop humming softly on the old wooden desk that had come with the house. As the sun set, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I made myself a simple dinner and settled in to watch some TV. The house was quiet, the only sound the occasional creak of the floorboards as the house settled into the night. Around midnight, I decided to call it a night. I turned off the TV and checked the locks on the doors, a habit I had developed after moving to the hollow. The town was safe, there hadn't been a crime here in decades, but there was something about the darkness that made me uneasy. The nights were too quiet, the silence too complete. I was just about to head upstairs when I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible knock at the front door. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Who would be knocking at this hour? I stood there for a moment, listening, but the knock didn't come again. Maybe I had imagined it. But then I heard it again, a little louder this time, followed by a voice, a soft, melodic voice that seemed to float through the air like a whisper. "Please, let me in." A chill ran down my spine. The voice was unlike anything I had ever heard, too smooth, too perfect. It was almost hypnotic. I found myself drawn to the door, my hand reaching out to the handle before I even realized what I was doing. "Please. I need your help." The voice was closer now, just on the other side of the door. I could feel its presence, a cold, unnatural energy seeping through the wood. I stopped, my hand hovering just inches from the handle. Something was wrong. Every instinct screamed at me to step back, to get away from the door. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. There was a pause, and then the voice came again, softer this time, almost pleading. "I'm lost. I just need to come inside, just for a moment." The urge to open the door was overwhelming, but there was something in the back of my mind, a memory of something I had read or heard once, that made me hesitate. I took a step back, shaking my head as if trying to clear it. "No," I said, more firmly this time. "I can't help you. You need to leave." The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. For a moment, I thought the presence was gone, but then the voice came again, and this time it was different, harsher, angrier. "Let me in." The command was forceful, and I felt an intense pressure in my chest, like something was trying to crush me from the inside. I stumbled back, clutching my head, fighting the urge to obey. "Let me in." The voice was no longer soft or melodic. It was a guttural, inhuman growl that reverberated through the house, shaking the very walls. I staggered back, my vision blurring as the pressure intensified. The room seemed to spin, the shadows in the corners growing darker, deeper. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I found myself shouting, "No! You can't come in!" And just like that, the pressure vanished. The air cleared, the room stopped spinning, and I was left standing there, trembling, the silence pressing in on me once more. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The presence was gone, and the only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the wall. I backed away from the door, my legs weak, my mind reeling from what had just happened. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, a baseball bat clutched in my hands, my eyes fixed on the door. The darkness outside felt alive, like something was lurking just beyond the windows, watching, waiting. When the first light of dawn finally broke through the curtains, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The daylight made everything feel normal again, as if the events of the night had been nothing more than a bad dream. But I knew better. Something had been outside my door, something that wasn't human. I spent the next day in a daze, trying to make sense of what had happened. I wanted to believe it had all been in my head, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion or stress, but the memory of that voice, the force behind it, was too vivid to dismiss. That evening, as the sun began to set, I decided to go into town. I needed to talk to someone, to tell them what had happened, to see if anyone else had experienced anything similar. But when I arrived at the town square, I found it deserted. The usually bustling shops were closed, the windows dark, and the streets empty. I headed to the local diner, the one place that was always open, hoping to find someone there. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in, and the familiar smell of coffee and frying bacon greeted me. But the place was nearly empty, save for a couple of regulars sitting at the counter and the owner, Mrs. O'Leary, wiping down the tables. She looked up as I entered, her warm smile faltering slightly when she saw the expression on my face. "You all right, dear? You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated, unsure of how to begin. I need to ask you something, Mrs. O'Leary. Has anything strange happened in town recently? Anything unusual?" She frowned, setting down the cloth she'd been using. "Strange? What do you mean, dear?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Last night, something was outside my house. It was trying to get in, but it couldn't. It was like it needed me to invite it in." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. She shook her head, her expression softening with concern. "You've probably just had a bad dream, dear. This town is as quiet as they come. Nothing like that could happen here." I wanted to believe her, but the memory of that voice, the command to let it in, was still fresh in my mind. "I know what I heard, Mrs. O'Leary. It wasn't a dream." One of the regulars at the counter, an older man named Frank, turned in his seat to look at me. "What exactly did you hear, son?" I hesitated, feeling a little foolish now that I was saying it out loud. It was a voice, outside my door. It sounded like a woman at first, asking for help. But then it changed. It became something else, something inhuman. It demanded to be let in, and when I refused, it got angry. Frank's expression darkened, and he exchanged a glance with Mrs. O'Leary. "You're not from around here, are you?" I shook my head. "No, I moved here about a year ago." He nodded, as if that explained everything. "This town, it's got a history. Most folks here don't talk about it, but there's been some strange happenings over the years. People disappearing, accidents that don't make sense, things that can't be explained. But it's all just old stories now, forgotten by most." "What kind of stories?" I asked, my curiosity piqued despite the fear still gnawing at me. Frank sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "There's been talk, over the years, about something in the woods. Something not quite human. Folks say it's been around for a long time, longer than anyone can remember. It's said to be drawn to certain people, outsiders mostly, those who don't belong. It can't come into your home unless you invite it in, but once it's got its sight set on you, it doesn't give up easily. A chill ran down my spine. Are you saying it's a vampire? Frank shrugged, his expression unreadable. Could be. Could be something worse. No one really knows. But if you've seen it, if it's tried to get in, you need to be careful. Once it's marked you, it won't stop until it gets what it wants. Mrs. O'Leary crossed herself, muttering a prayer under her breath. God help you, dear. Whatever it is, it's nothing good. I left the diner feeling more uneasy than before. The idea that something had marked me, that it wouldn't stop until it had me, was terrifying. But what could I do? The thought of leaving Maple Hollow crossed my mind, but something told me it wouldn't be that easy. Whatever it wasn't bound by the borders of the town. The days that followed were a blur of fear and paranoia. Every time the sun set, I would lock myself inside, barricading the doors and windows, waiting for that voice to return. I didn't sleep, I barely ate. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every little sound, every creak of the floorboards. And then, one night, it came back. It was around midnight, the same time as before. I was sitting in the living room, a shotgun across my lap, when I heard it, the soft, melodic voice, calling to me from the darkness outside. Please, let me in. The voice was as hypnotic as before, but this time I was prepared. I gripped the shotgun tightly, my heart racing as I called out, "Go away. You're not welcome here." There was a pause, and then the voice came again, more insistent. "Let me in. I need your help." I could feel the pressure building in my chest, the same crushing sensation I had felt before. But this time, I fought back, forcing myself to stand, to move toward the door. "You can't come in," I shouted, my voice trembling. "You're not welcome here." The voice changed, growing harsher, more guttural. "Let me in." I could see the door bulging inward, as if something was pressing against it with unimaginable force. The wood groaned and creaked, the hinges straining under the pressure. But I held my ground, refusing to give in. "No!" I screamed, raising the shotgun. "You're not coming in." For a moment, I thought the door would give way, that the thing outside would finally break through. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the pressure vanished. The door returned to its normal shape, the house falling silent once more. I stood there, trembling, the shotgun still raised, waiting for something else to happen. But the presence was gone, leaving nothing but the oppressive silence in its wake. I didn't lower the shotgun until the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains. Exhausted, I collapsed onto the couch, my body shaking with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Whatever it was, it hadn't gotten in. But I knew it would be back. It would keep trying, night after night, until it finally succeeded. The townspeople still wouldn't listen to me. They dismissed my warnings, chalking it up to stress or an overactive imagination. Even Frank, who had seemed to believe me at first, grew distant, avoiding my gaze whenever we crossed paths in town. It was as if the town itself was conspiring to keep the truth hidden, to pretend that everything was normal, even as something dark and ancient stalked its streets. I became a prisoner in my own home, too afraid to leave after dark, too exhausted to sleep during the day. The nights were the worst, filled with the constant fear that tonight would be the night it finally broke through, that I would wake up to find it standing over me, its soulless eyes boring into mine. The history of Maple Hollow, the tragedies that had been forgotten by most, now made sense in a horrifying way. How many others had faced this terror before me? How many had given in, had opened the door, only to disappear without a trace? I knew I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a cycle of fear and desperation. But what could I do? The thing outside was relentless, its hunger insatiable. And no one, not a single person in that cursed town, would help me. One night, as I sat in the darkness, waiting for the inevitable, I made a decision. I wouldn't let it win. I wouldn't let it take me, no matter what. I was stronger than it, stronger than the fear it tried to use against me. When the voice came again, soft and pleading, I didn't respond. I closed my eyes, blocking it out, refusing to let it into my mind. The pressure built, the door creaked and groaned, but I held firm, my resolve unshakable. It tried again, night after night, but each time, I resisted, growing stronger, more determined. I could feel it growing frustrated, its attempts more desperate, but it never succeeded. It couldn't get in. Weeks passed, and the visits became less frequent, the voice weaker, more distant. I knew it was still out there, lurking in the shadows, but it was losing. It couldn't break me. One morning, as the sun rose over Maple Hollow, I realized something had changed. The weight that had been pressing down on me for so long was gone, lifted as if by some unseen force. The air felt lighter, the shadows less threatening. I had won. I had survived. But the victory was hollow. The fear, the trauma, would never fully leave me. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind, would always make me jump, would always remind me of the nights I had spent battling the darkness. I was alive, but I was not the same. The town had marked me, just as it had marked so many others before me. I left Maple Hollow soon after, unable to bear the weight of its secrets any longer. I don't know where I'm going, or what I'll do next, but one thing is certain, I'll never forget the horrors I faced in that quiet, unassuming town. And I'll never stop looking over my shoulder, fearing the day when the darkness finally catches up to me. Because I know, deep down, that it will. Thank you for listening to Serenity Valley Stories, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment down below, share with your friends, and check out the other stories on the channel.